Another area that we are concerned about that's coming up next week is the Senate will have a hearing to consider the nomination of Dan Coates to be the director of the Department of National Intelligence, which really oversees the entire umbrella of intelligence agencies. There are a number of concerns that we have, both myself as well as other members of the Fourth Amendment Caucus, which I'm a founding member of. We've written a letter that we're circulating and will be sending to the senators on the Intel Committee to ask Mr. Coates, as they consider his nomination, specifically along the lines of protecting our civil liberties and privacy. Some will say that, well, you shouldn't expect any privacy and the government should be able to access any of your information in the name of national security. And that unless you allow that somehow we're not able to keep the American people safe, which is an unfortunate fear-based tactic that is used to justify this rampant overcollection and invasion of privacy. So we are hoping that these senators ask these questions and remaining very vigilant on these new individuals who will be put into these positions of power over our civil liberties and privacy. I have a great deal of concern with regard to the new CIA director, a former colleague of mine, Mike Pompeo, because he has stated as a member of Congress very publicly that he thinks that we should go even farther than already has been done in allowing this collection of what they call metadata, collecting information on, he said, on habits, patterns, and things that we do in our everyday lives. There's a balance. We make sure that our civil liberties are protected and that our country is secure. And that is the balance and responsibility that we have as leaders and that we must make sure that we continue to protect. I have introduced a bill in December of last year called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. Many people know that if you or I or anyone provided support of any kind to individuals or groups who are working with, allied with terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, we would be arrested, thrown in jail. This is illegal, it's clear. But what many people, including some members of Congress, are surprised to learn is that our government has been, through the CIA, quietly providing both arms, money, intelligence, and other types of support, both directly and indirectly, to militant groups who are allied with and working with Al-Qaeda, specifically in Syria, in this war to overthrow the Syrian government. So it's essentially a proxy regime change war that we taxpayers have been supporting through this CIA program. In a larger sense, this is something that has been going on for even longer, indirectly, through our government providing support through countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others who are also supporting terrorist groups in different parts of the world. So this is a bill that I introduced after some of this information has come to light publicly more and more, the billions of dollars that our country has been spending on these programs just in Syria, what to speak of the larger amounts of money that have been spent elsewhere. And it's important for us to make sure that leaders are held accountable and that we take a clear and strong position that we as American taxpayers will not allow our taxpayer dollars to be used to arm these militant groups working with terrorists. Seems like a simple proposition, but while it is a bipartisan bill, it's going to be the grassroots support and activation urging members of Congress to sign on to this legislation that will allow it to get traction. And we're working in Washington to do that, and I ask for your support as well in getting that legislation passed. I'll bring up a couple of quick issues before we open it up. Some of you may have brought these questions, and I want to bring them up front because these are some of our high volume questions. A lot of people have been talking to me over the week that I've been here on each of the different islands about healthcare. What's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act? What's going to happen with Medicare? What's going to happen with Medicaid? We've been meeting with and hearing from doctors, hospitals, nonprofit service providers. My focus this week has largely been on criminal justice reform, and I've spent time visiting correctional facilities on Oahu, on Maui, and then just this morning on Kauai, and the nonprofits that help provide a lot of services to those who are working to basically rebuild their lives as they have served their time and re-enter back to the communities. So a lot of the funding for some of these service providers comes from Medicaid, for example, in mental health counseling and services that are rampant, especially amongst our kids who are over on the windward side at the youth correctional facility. So next week, Republicans have said that they're going to be putting forward an outline on their health care plan. A lot has been said about, if you're going to repeal Obamacare as they say they want to, what are they going to replace it with? And that remains a very big question mark that's causing a lot of fear and uncertainty in a lot of people's minds, especially in those of our kupuna. We had a roundtable yesterday on Maui with the AARP members on Maui, and the concern specifically about how this impacts Medicare, how it impacts the rising cost of prescription drugs, how it would reopen what they call the donut hole that basically would directly impact our kupuna ability to either buy their medicine or not. A number of these different issues are of great concern. We don't know what's going to be in this outline. We don't know what their plan is going to be, but some of the things that they have put forward, for example, Medicare vouchers, this is something obviously that I oppose because of the how it would directly negatively impact the certainty and the care that our kupuna rely on and depend on. It would cause them to have a shortage in what they're able to afford as far as healthcare goes, and not be prepared to deal with unforeseen health circumstances and emergencies and crises that happen to all of us. Medicaid block grants is another area of concern that we are watching very closely, that again would negatively impact the states in particular. And we've heard this from governors and people in different states about how this would directly impact their ability to provide care for those most in need in our communities. It's no secret I was a strong supporter of Bernie Sanders throughout the presidential campaign, and if he were president, we'd be having a very different conversation today. We'd be talking about how to not repeal the Affordable Care Act, but make it stronger, and to find ways to deliver universal health care to people. But this is a big area that we're remaining very vigilant on, and continuing to speak out specifically on the direct impacts to people, and those personal stories that we've been hearing from folks on how it would impact their lives is something we're going to continue to share. Many people have been calling my office with concerns about ties that the Trump administration himself or people within his administration have with foreign governments, and the lack of transparency that exists. So there's a bill sponsored by Congressman Jerry Nadler from New York that uses kind of a legislative maneuvering tool that would require federal agencies to provide documentation to Congress on any potential conflicts of interest or investigations or things that are occurring, so that we know what's there, what's actually there. And this is not just for the president, but it's for others within his top tier of administration. And the bill actually lists a few different people by name. I'm being added as a co-sponsor to this legislation because we need transparency. We need transparency at the highest levels in the administration, the president, and the White House, but also for members of Congress. This is a basic expectation that people should have, in particular when it comes to ties and connections, whether they be monetary or otherwise, with foreign governments. A lot of people are talking about Russia, but we should be just as concerned about ties with countries like Saudi Arabia and others who clearly do not have our interests in mind. The last thing I'll mention before we open it up, that's been very concerning to me is legislation that's been introduced and consistent efforts to try to weaken or completely get rid of the EPA. For me, it's growing up in a place like Hawaii, where protection of our land, protection of our water, protection of our environment is a way of life. It's not a political issue. It's a part of our culture. Yes, it's economic. If we ruin our environment, then a large driver of our tourism economy will have a negative impact here, but it's a deep thing that those of us who live here, whether you grew up here or not, take seriously, because it's our home and it's our future. It's our kids' future. There have been a number of pieces of legislation just in the last few weeks in Congress that I've voted against and oppose strongly, which weaken, regulations on water and other things, rules that the Obama administration had put in place, and immediately the Republicans are trying to repeal. The legislation that's been introduced recently to get rid of the EPA completely is obviously very concerning. And these are things that we're going to continue to fight and work against in Congress to make sure that our environment is protected. For me, this is an issue that got me involved in politics in the first place. The issue of water protection, protecting our environment. And I think that's where, as folks are asking us, okay, so what do we do? There are things that can be done to make sure that, these elections, as we know, have consequences. But in the meantime, we're going to do what we can at the federal level. But as we've seen some states like California already start to do, there are actions and protections that can and should be taken at the state and local level to provide, if that protection is being weakened on the federal side, we can step it up at the state and local level to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to protect our INA. So those are some top line things. There's a lot going on right now. I'm really privileged and proud to be able to represent Hawaii and to be able to come home to Hawaii and to do all I can to bring the aloha spirit that is strong and that is the heart of our home to what we do in Washington.